It was a dark and quiet night when Lyra made her move. The stars outside flickered faintly, their light barely reaching the ground where she was hiding. She had been trapped in this strange place for what felt like forever. Her heart raced as she crouched in the shadows of the cold metal walls. The world around her was unfamiliar, full of strange creatures and cold eyes. But there was one thing she knew for sure. She couldn't stay here any longer. Lyra had been born into a life of service, forced to obey every order given by her people. Her race, known for their beauty and grace, was also known for their cruelty and harsh rules. As a child, she had been promised a future of power, but instead, she had been sold to a harsh life, used as a tool for their politics. Her people expected her to follow orders, never question, and always serve. But that was before she met him, James, the human soldier who had come to their planet on a mission. He didn't know what he was getting into. He didn't know that his arrival would change everything. He didn't know that she would see him as her only hope, the only way out of the cruel world that had been forced upon her. Lyra's body shook as she moved quietly through the dark hallways, her heart pounding. In her chest, she had seen James just hours before, and she knew this was her only chance. He was different from the others, different from the harsh soldiers and the alien leaders who had treated her like an object. James had shown her kindness, a kindness she had never known before. In that brief moment, when their eyes met, Lyra felt something deep inside her stir. It was as if, for the first time, someone had seen her as a person and not as a tool. She remembered the way his hand had brushed against hers when he had passed her a bottle of water, how he had looked at her with pity, not hatred. And in that moment, Lyra knew she couldn't stay in the place where she had been trapped for so long, but escaping wouldn't be easy. The guards were always watching, always patrolling. If she was caught trying to escape, the punishment would be severe. She had heard whispers in the corridors, whispers about what happened to those who tried to leave. They were never seen again. But Lyra couldn't stay. She couldn't go back to a life of fear, of serving those who treated her like nothing more than a possession. The thought of it made her stomach turn. She reached the door to the outside world, the door that would lead her to James. He was her only hope. She had to trust him. She didn't know if he would believe her, but she had no choice. Her only chance at freedom was in his hands. The cold metal of the door felt heavy against her fingers as she reached for the handle. The door opened with a soft creak, and Lyra stepped outside into the moonlight. She was alone in the dark. The only sound, the soft rustle of the wind through the trees. Her heart beat loudly in her chest. As she moved towards the human camp, she didn't know what she would say to him, but she had to try. She couldn't go back to the life she had left behind. When she reached the camp, she saw him. James was standing by a fire, his back turned to her. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped from the weight of his duties, but when he turned and saw her standing there, his eyes widened in surprise. "Lyra?" James said, his voice soft and cautious. She took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she spoke. "Please," she whispered. "I don't want to go back. I'll be a good girl. I promise, let me stay." Tears welled up in her eyes as she spoke, the words flowing out before she could stop them. She had never begged anyone for anything before, but she couldn't hold back now. She had nothing left but this moment. James looked at her, his expression unreadable. He seemed unsure, torn between his duty and the sincerity in her eyes. He had seen the way she had been treated, how she had been forced to serve her people. But could he trust her? Was this just a trick? Lyra stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I don't want to go back. I don't want to be their servant anymore. Please, I'll do anything. Just let me stay." James took a step towards her, his brow furrowing as he considered her words. He had seen the fear in her eyes before, but this was different. There was something in her that made him believe her, something in the way she spoke, the way she looked at him with hope. For a moment there was silence between them. The wind rustled through the trees, but everything else was still. James looked down at her, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision he had to make. "I don't know if I can," James said quietly. "I don't know if I can trust you." Lyra's heart sank, and she took a step back. tears streaming down her face. She had tried, but she could see the doubt in his eyes. She had failed. But then, to her surprise, James reached out and touched her arm gently. "But I'll give you a chance." Lyra's breath caught in her throat, and for the first time in a long while she felt hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She nodded, wiping her tears away. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me a chance." And with that, Lyra took the first step into a new life, one where she could finally be free, where she could be her own person. And as James led her away from the life she had known, Lyra couldn't help but believe that maybe, just maybe, she had a future after all. The next morning, the light of the sun barely touched the ground as James and Lyra moved quietly through the dense forest. The air was cool, and the rustling of the trees filled the silence around them. James couldn't help but glance at Lyra. Every now and then, she walked beside him, her steps cautious, her eyes scanning their surroundings. She had never been outside her prison before, never had the chance to explore the world beyond the walls that confined her for so long. Lyra had been born into a world of rules and expectations, a world where she had no control over her own life. Every decision had been made for her. Every step had been ordered by others. The alien species she came from valued obedience above all, and she had been forced to follow those rules, even though they made her heart ache. But now she was free, or at least, she hoped so. She had to trust James. He was her only chance for survival, for a life beyond the cold, rigid control of her people. But trust was not something that came easily to her. She had learned to be cautious, to keep her true feelings hidden. She couldn't afford to show any weakness, not with so much at stake. As they walked, James turned to her. "How are you holding up?" he asked softly. Lyra hesitated. She wasn't used to talking about her feelings, let alone sharing them with someone else. But there was something about James, something in his eyes, that made her feel like she could. I'm scared," she admitted quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "I've never been outside the compound before. I don't know what's out here. What if I can't survive?" James stopped walking and looked at her, his face serious. "You don't have to be afraid. You're not alone anymore." "Anything happened to you?" Lyra's heart fluttered at his words. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust him. But after everything she had been through, it was hard. Her people had taught her that emotions were a weakness, that trusting anyone outside of her race was dangerous. But something inside her told her that James was different. "I don't know how to survive out here," she confessed, looking at the ground. "I've always been told what to do. I don't know how to make my own decisions." James gave her a reassuring smile. "We'll figure it out together. I've been out here for a long time. I'll teach you how to stay safe." To survive? The warmth in his voice gave her a sense of comfort, but still the fear lingered. What if she couldn't adapt? What if James didn't really want her around once the danger had passed? These thoughts clouded her mind, but she pushed them away. For the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope as they continued their journey. Lyra found herself watching James closely. He moved with confidence, his eyes always alert, scanning for any sign of danger. Admired how calm he seemed, even in such a harsh environment. His determination was something she hadn't seen before, not in the people she had been forced to serve. It was a quality she wanted to learn, to have strength, independence, the ability to stand on her own. But as the day wore on, the unease inside her grew. They were in unfamiliar territory now. The alien forces that had been after her would stop. Had nothing to find her, and she didn't know how far they would go to get her back. Would they kill anyone who tried to protect her? She didn't know what she had brought onto James's shoulders by asking him for help. The thought of the soldiers who had kept her captive filled her with dread. She remembered the cold, emotionless faces of the guards, the harsh punishments for even the smallest mistake. They had treated her as if she were nothing more than a tool for their use. And now she was running from them. The weight of her past was heavy, and she wasn't sure if she could outrun it. That evening, as they made camp by a small stream, Lyra sat a little apart from James, lost in thought. She could hear him preparing food, but she couldn't bring herself to join him just yet. Her mind was racing, filled with questions, doubts, and fears. She had been so sure when she first ran to James for help, but now the reality of what they were up against was starting to sink in. James noticed her sitting alone and walked over, sitting down beside her. He didn't say anything at first, just let the quiet settle between them. Finally, after a long moment, he spoke. "You're not alone, Lyra. You don't have to carry all of this by yourself." Lyra's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away, not wanting to show any weakness. "I've always had to do everything by myself," she whispered. "I don't know how to trust someone else. I've been taught my whole life that I'm just a tool, something to be used and then discarded." James's expression softened as he placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I won't discard you, I promise. I know you've had it hard, but you don't have to carry that burden anymore. You don't have to be alone." For the first time in a long while, Lyra felt a weight lift from her chest. Maybe James was right. Maybe she could learn to trust again. Maybe she could find a new life, one where she didn't have to be afraid anymore. They sat together in silence for a while, the sound of the stream flowing beside them. Lyra realized that this was the first time in her life that she didn't feel like she was in danger. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe. But deep down, she knew they couldn't stay here forever. The alien forces were still out there, and they would stop at nothing to bring her back. They couldn't keep running, not like this. They needed a plan, needed to figure out how to stop the threat for good. But as she looked at James, she knew that, for now, this was enough. For the first time, she had someone she could rely on. And that was all she needed to move forward. The night air was cool as James and Lyra made their way through the dense forest. The crunch of the dry leaves beneath their boots, the only sound breaking the stillness. They had traveled for hours, moving carefully and quietly to avoid detection. The world around them felt unfamiliar to Lyra, but at the same time, it felt like a strange kind of freedom. For the first time in her life, she wasn't being controlled by others, but the weight of their journey was heavy on her mind. Lyra had never been so far from the compound where she had spent her entire life. She had been trained to obey, to follow orders, to never question. But now, for the first time, she was making decisions for herself. The thought made her heart race with both fear and excitement. She didn't know what would come next, but she was determined to find out. As they moved through the dark woods, James kept a careful eye on their surroundings. He had been in dangerous situations before, but this one felt different. They were being hunted. Lyra's people, or rather, the alien faction that had held her captive, were not going to let her go without a fight. He had seen their ships in the distance before, and he knew they wouldn't stop until they found her. "We need to keep moving," James said softly, his voice filled with urgency. "They'll be looking for us. The moment they realize you're gone, they'll send out their search teams." Lyra nodded, her heart heavy with guilt. She never wanted to bring James into this fight. She had wanted to escape on her own, but now, she realized, she couldn't do it alone. She had already put him in danger. The thought made her stomach twist, but she pushed it aside. There was no turning back now. She had to trust him. He was her only hope. They continued walking for hours, the trees growing thicker and the forest darker. As they approached a small clearing, James stopped and motioned for Lyra to stay quiet. He knelt down, scanning the area. Lyra's heart skipped a beat as she crouched beside him, holding her breath. Now she had seen James in action before, his sharp eyes and quick movements, but she had never seen him like this. So alert, so focused. "What's wrong?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "There's something in the air," James replied, his eyes narrowing. "I can't tell what it is, but it's close. Stay down." Lyra did as he said, her body pressed to the ground as they waited in silence. Every sound seemed to echo in the still night, an owl hooting in the distance, the rustle of leaves under the wind. But then Lyra heard it, a low hum in the air. It was soft at first, but it grew louder, closer. Her pulse quickened as she realized. It wasn't just the wind, it was the sound of a ship, a familiar, ominous hum. "They're here," James said quietly, his hand on his weapon. "Get ready." Lyra's heart pounded in her chest as she looked around the clearing, searching for a place to hide. The ship was coming closer, its hum filling the air like an approaching storm. She could hear the faint sound of voices, distant, but growing louder. The alien soldiers were coming. James motioned for Lyra to follow him as he moved quickly towards a thick cluster of trees. They pressed their bodies against the bark, trying to blend in with the shadows. The ship's hum grew louder, and Lyra felt her breath catch in her throat. She could hear the soldiers now, their footsteps crunching on the dry ground, their voices carrying in the cool night air. "Do you think they saw us?" Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," James replied, his eyes scanning the clearing. "But they're looking for you. We have to stay out of sight." Lyra's stomach twisted as she listened to the soldiers' voices grow. Nearer, she wanted to run, to escape, but she knew it was too late. The alien soldiers would never let her go. They would find her, and they would bring her back. The fear of being caught again, of being dragged back to that life of control and punishment, made her heart race. She had promised herself she would never go back, but now she wasn't so sure. James, sensing her fear, gave her a reassuring glance. "Don't worry, we're not going back. I won't let them take you." Lyra nodded, but the fear still clung to her like a heavy weight. The soldiers were getting closer, their footsteps louder now.
Ow!
She could see their shadows moving across the clearing, their searchlights sweeping the ground. The night seemed to close in around her, and she held her breath, praying they wouldn't spot them. Time seemed to stretch on forever. Lyra's heart beat in her ears, her palms sweating as she tried to remain as still as possible. She could hear James breathing quietly beside her, his focus unbroken. They had to stay hidden. If they were caught now, it would all be over then. Suddenly, the hum of the ship stopped. The soldiers' voices grew quiet, as if they were waiting for something. James's eyes widened, and he slowly raised his hand to signal to Lyra. They were running out of time, without warning. James grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her through the trees, moving quickly and quietly. They sprinted through the forest. The sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick underbrush. Lyra's heart raced in her chest, but she couldn't look back. She had to keep moving, had to stay with James. He was her only chance. The alien soldiers, now aware of their presence, shouted in the distance. Their voices echoed through the forest, sending a chill down Lyra's spine. They were close, too close. "James, what do we do now?" Lyra gasped, her breath coming in short bursts. "We keep running," he said, his voice filled with determination. "We don't stop. Not until we're out of their reach." And so they ran. Through the dark forests, through the thick trees, their pursuers hot on their trail. The night was alive with danger, but Lyra didn't care. She was running for her life, for a chance at freedom. With James by her side, she knew she wasn't going to stop fighting. The night felt endless as James and Lyra ran through the dense forest, the sound of alien soldiers shouting behind them growing louder with each passing moment. Lyra's breath came in sharp gasps, her heart pounding as fear surged through her. The branches of the trees scratched at her skin, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Every moment they spent running brought them closer to safety, but it also brought them closer to danger. James, ahead of her, moved with purpose. His experience as a soldier had kept him calm in the chaos. He was focused, scanning their surroundings constantly, looking for any signs of the alien soldiers who were hot on their trail. Lyra, on the other hand, was still adjusting to this new life, to this world of freedom. But the longer they ran, the more she realized how much she had left behind. The trees thinned out as they reached the edge of the forest. The cold moonlight bathed the clearing in silver, casting long shadows across the ground. James stopped and motioned for Lyra to crouch low. He looked back, scanning the horizon, his brow furrowed with concern. "We have to keep moving," James said quietly, his voice low but urgent. "But we can't keep running forever. We need a plan." Lyra nodded, though her mind was racing. The realization that they couldn't outrun their pursuers forever settled over her like a heavy weight. She knew the alien soldiers would stop at nothing to find her. They had been ruthless before, and there was no doubt they would be just as relentless now. She wasn't just running from them, she was running from her entire past. "I don't know how to fight back," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I don't even know where to go." James turned to her, his expression softening as he saw the fear in her eyes. "You don't have to fight," he said gently. "I'll protect you. Just have to trust me." Lyra swallowed hard. Trust. The word echoed in her mind. She had never really been able to trust anyone before, especially not her own people. She had been taught to be suspicious, to always keep her guard up. But something about James made her want to believe him. To trust him. It was a strange feeling, something she wasn't used to. "I do trust you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm scared. I don't know how to survive out here." James nodded, understanding her fear. "We'll figure it out together. We just need to keep moving." They continued on, making their way through the open fields that stretched out before them. The air was thick with tension, and the distant sounds of the alien soldiers still echoed behind them. James kept a steady pace, but Lyra struggled to keep up. The physical exhaustion was starting to catch up with her. Her body was aching, and her mind was overwhelmed by the events that had unfolded over the past few days. They stopped by a small creek to rest for a while. The sound of the water rushing over the rocks was soothing, a momentary relief from the constant tension. Lyra sat down on a large rock by the water, her head resting in her hands. She felt the weight of the journey pressing down on her. She had wanted to escape to be free, but now that she was out in the open, she realized just how unprepared she was. James sat down beside her, giving her a moment of peace. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the fear that still lingered in her every movement, but he could also see the strength in her. She was more than she realized. She had survived in a world where she was treated like a tool, and now she was surviving in a world where she had the chance to be herself. After a long moment of silence, Lyra spoke again. "James, I need to tell you something." He turned to look at her, his expression serious but gentle. "What is it?" Lyra hesitated for a moment, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her sleeve. She had been keeping this secret from him for a while now, but she knew that if they were going to survive, she had to tell him the truth. She had to trust him. "I wasn't always like this," she said slowly. "I wasn't always running from my people. I used to have a different life where I had a family, a future. But everything changed when they took it all away." James looked at her with concern. "What do you mean?" Lyra took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I'm not just any ordinary alien. I'm part of a royal family. My people are powerful, and I was once treated like a princess. But when my family was overthrown, I was taken from my home and forced into servitude. I was promised a future. As a pawn in their political games, I was supposed to marry someone I didn't love, someone who could secure peace for our people. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't live a life where I was nothing more than a tool, so I ran." The words came out in a rush, but the weight of them hung heavy in the air. Lyra's hands shook as she spoke, her past finally coming to light. She had been holding on to this secret for so long, carrying it with her like a burden she couldn't shake. James was silent for a moment, taking in her words. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but filled with understanding. "I can't imagine what you've been through," he said softly. "But I can promise you this, you're not alone anymore. You don't have to be afraid. You don't have to go back." Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and fear. "But what if they come for me? What if they don't stop until they have me back?" James's expression grew serious. "You won't let them take you. I'll do everything I can to protect you." Lyra felt a strange sense of relief at his words. For the first time since she had escaped, she felt like there was a chance for a new life. A life where she wasn't controlled, where she wasn't treated like an object. She had never known what it was like to be truly free. But now, with James by her side, she was starting to believe it was possible. The sound of rustling leaves broke their moment of peace. James's eyes immediately sharpened, and he stood up, motioning for Lyra to do the same. The alien soldiers were getting closer. The time to run was running out. "Stay close to me," James said, his voice filled with urgency. Lyra nodded, her heart racing once more as they prepared to face the danger ahead. The path to freedom was never going to be easy, but with James by her side, Lyra felt stronger than she ever had before. Together, they would fight for the life she deserved. The days had begun to blur together as James and Lyra made their way through the dense forest, always moving, always looking over their shoulders. The sounds of their footsteps were swallowed by the thick underbrush, the trees towering over them. Like silent sentinels, Lyra had never felt so free, yet so trapped at the same time. She was running from the past, from the people who had controlled her life. But every day that passed brought her closer to a new life, a life where she wasn't a pawn in someone else's game. It was strange, this feeling of freedom. She had always been taught to obey, to follow orders without question. She had been raised to believe that her purpose was to serve others, that her own desires didn't matter. But now, with James by her side, she was starting to see things differently. She was starting to realize that she had the power to make her own choices. To shape her own future, James had become her guide in this new world, teaching her how to survive and navigate through the wilderness. At first, she had struggled to keep up with him. She wasn't used to the physical exertion, the constant movement, but over time, she grew stronger, more capable. She learned how to find food in the wild, how to build a fire, how to find shelter. Every small step felt like a victory, a reminder that she was capable of more than she had ever thought possible as they continued on their journey. Lyra couldn't help but notice how different James was from the soldiers she had known. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a protector, a man who cared about others, who was willing to risk his life for her. She had seen the way he looked out for her, the way he made sure she was safe, even when he was exhausted himself. It was something she had never experienced before, and it made her heart ache with gratitude. But there were moments, quiet moments, when they sat by the fire or walked side by side. Lyra found herself looking at James in a way she hadn't intended. There was something about him, something that went beyond just the protective soldier. It was his kindness, his strength, his quiet confidence. He made her feel like she mattered, like she wasn't just a tool to be used, but a person worthy of respect. It was confusing, this feeling. Lyra had spent so much of her life being told that love was a weakness, that it was something to be feared. But with James, it felt different. She didn't feel afraid. She felt safe. And that scared her more than anything. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Lyra and James sat by the fire. The crackling of the wood was the only sound between them. James was cleaning, his weapon, his movements methodical, while Lyra watched him in silence. She couldn't help but feel a sense of awe, a quiet admiration for the man who had saved her life, who had given her a chance at something better. "You've been teaching me a lot," Lyra said after a long silence, her voice soft and unsure. "I never thought I could do any of this. I never thought I could survive on my own." James looked up from his weapon, his gaze softening as he met her eyes. "You're stronger than you think, Lyra. You've already survived more than most people could handle. You've got a fire inside you that I've seen in very few people." Lyra smiled weakly, her heart swelling with warmth at his words. Had never heard anyone speak to her like that before. It was as if James saw her for who she truly was. It's not just for her role or her past. "I don't know what to do with all this freedom," she admitted, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I've spent my whole life being told what to do, where to go. I don't know how to make my own decisions." James set his weapon aside and moved closer to her. "That's okay," he said gently. "You don't have to figure it all out right now. We'll take it one step at a time." Lyra's gaze dropped to her hands, her fingers nervously picking at the fabric of her shirt. She had always been so, focused on survival, on just getting by, that she had never thought about what she truly wanted. She had never allowed herself to dream, to hope for anything more than just a life without fear. But now, with James by her side, she was starting to wonder, could she have more? Could she have a life where she didn't have to look over her shoulder all the time? A life where she could choose her own path? James, Lyra said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think it's possible? To start over? To leave the past behind and build something new?" James didn't answer right away. He sat beside her, his expression thoughtful. Then, after a long pause, he turned to her and smiled. "I think anything's possible, Lyra, as long as you're willing to fight for it." Her heart skipped a beat at his words, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, she could have a future. A future that was hers to shape, not one forced upon her by others. They sat in silence for a while, the warmth of the fire casting soft shadows on their faces. Lyra leaned back against the rock they were sitting on, gazing up at the stars. Night was clear, and the sky stretched endlessly above them. For a moment, she felt at peace. "I've never seen the stars like this before," she said, her voice soft. "Back where I'm from, the sky was always covered in clouds. Couldn't see anything beyond the walls." James looked up at the sky as well, his expression peaceful. "There's a lot to see out here, Lyra, more than we could ever imagine." Smiled at his words, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She was starting to believe him. The world was bigger than she had ever known, and she had the chance to explore it. Well, she had the chance to build something new, something better. For the first time, Lyra allowed herself to believe in the future she could make for herself. And she knew, with James by her side, that it was going to be a future worth fighting for. The quiet of the forest was shattered by the sound of footsteps approaching through the underbrush. Lyra's heart skipped a beat as she tensed, her body instinctively reacting to the danger. She had learned the hard way to trust her instincts, and right now they were screaming at her. The alien soldiers were close, too close. James was already on his feet, his eyes scanning the shadows around them. He motioned for Lyra to stay low, his face grim with determination. The quiet that had settled between them in the past few days was gone. They were no longer just two people trying to survive. They were about to face a battle for their lives. Lyra's throat tightened as she crouched beside James, her fingers gripping the cold ground beneath her. The fear from earlier had returned. Stronger this time. She had come so far. They had come so far. But now, it felt like everything was about to be ripped away from her. "We need to move fast," James whispered, his voice calm but urgent. "Stay close to me. Don't make a sound." Lyra nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She was terrified, but she had no choice. She trusted James with everything she had. He was her protector, her only hope. And right now, he was telling her to fight, to survive. They moved quickly, slipping through the trees, their movements swift and silent. The sound of the soldiers grew louder, the crunch of leaves underfoot, and the distant hum of their technology getting closer by the second. James's hand was firm on her arm, guiding her forward with the kind of calm confidence that only a soldier could have. Lyra kept her head down, doing her best to stay quiet, to stay out of sight. But the soldiers weren't making it easy. They were getting closer, their searchlights sweeping through the trees, looking for any sign of movement. The shadows grew longer, and Lyra could feel the tension in the air. The soldiers were close enough now that she could hear their voices, low and harsh. They were speaking in a language she didn't understand, but she could tell from their tone that they were getting frustrated. James pulled her into a small hollow in the ground, hidden by thick underbrush. They pressed their backs against the earth, their breaths shallow as they waited for the soldiers to pass. Lyra's mind raced. She couldn't let them catch her. She couldn't let them take her back to the life she had escaped from. But it wasn't just her life at risk anymore. It was James's too. She looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and fear. He was risking everything to help her. He had been her protector from the very beginning, but now as they faced the alien soldiers head-on, she realized just how much he meant to her. He wasn't just a soldier. He wasn't just someone she relied on for survival. He was her partner, her friend. And she was starting to realize something more. But there was no time for thoughts like that now. The soldiers were closer than ever. James motioned for her to stay still and stay quiet. He was scanning the area, his eyes sharp, looking for a way out. He knew that they couldn't stay hidden forever. They would have to face the soldiers eventually, and then, as if the universe had decided it was time. The moment of truth arrived. A shout rang through the trees, the voice of an alien soldier calling out to his comrades. They had spotted something. A movement in the shadows. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She could hear them moving closer, getting ready to surround them. "We can't stay here," James muttered under his breath. "We fight." Lyra's heart dropped. She wasn't prepared for this. She'd never fought in her life. But she couldn't let James do this alone. She couldn't run anymore. "Are you ready?" James asked, his voice steady, though there was a hard edge to it now. He wasn't asking if she was ready for the fight. He was asking if she was ready to face the consequences. To survive? Lyra nodded, her heart pounding with fear. "I'm ready." Out. And with that, they moved. James led the way, his movements precise and quick. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a warrior. He knew what to do, where to strike, how to get the advantage. Lyra followed him, her feet moving faster than she thought possible, adrenaline pumping through her veins. She didn't know what she was doing, but she trusted James's lead. The first soldier they encountered was quick, his alien weapon aimed at them before they even had a chance to react. But James was faster, ducked low and rolled to the side, his own weapon drawn in an instant. There was a flash of light, and the soldier went down, his weapon clattering to the ground. Lyra froze for a moment, her eyes wide as she watched the soldier fall. She had never seen death up close before. The reality of the situation hit her harder than anything else had. But there was no time to think. There were more soldiers, and they were coming fast. James pulled her forward, his hand firm around her wrist. "Stay close, Lyra. We're almost there." They kept moving, dodging through the trees, staying low and fast. Lyra's heart raced with every step, the sound of the soldiers getting louder as they pursued them. James kept them one step ahead, his focus unbroken. He was in control, guiding her through the chaos, keeping her safe, and then, just as they thought they were in the clear, they were surrounded. Alien soldiers appeared from all sides, their weapons raised, faces cold and emotionless. James's grip tightened on Lyra's arm. There was no escape now. They were trapped. But James didn't back down. He stood tall, his eyes narrowing. As he faced the soldiers, "You won't take her," he said, his voice low and steady. "Not without a fight." The soldiers advanced, their weapons raised, ready to strike. But James wasn't done yet. He had one last trick up his sleeve. He grabbed a small device from his belt and pressed a button. In an instant, a blinding flash of light filled the clearing. The soldiers recoiled, momentarily blinded by the sudden burst of light. It was enough. James took the opportunity to grab Lyra's hand and pull her forward. "Run," he shouted, and they did. With the soldiers disoriented, they sprinted forward, breaking through the trees and into the open field beyond. The night air was thick with tension, but they were free at least for now. James and Lyra didn't look back as they ran. They didn't need to. The battle wasn't over, but they had won this round, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Lyra believed that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance at surviving this fight together.